All right, hello and welcome to the 14th installment of our 50 Pages a Day War and Peace Read Through Quarantine Edition. I'm Matthew Robinson. Joining me 37 miles away from the camera is Dimitri Portnoy. Hello, Dimitri.
Hello,
How are
Matt.
you tonight, my friend?
I'm great.
Good. Let us talk about these pages. We have some exciting stuff and also some slow, boring council meetings that felt like scenes that should have been cut from the Star Wars prequels. But we do open on our 50 pages open on an exciting moment of Nikolai galloping against the Dragoons and almost murdering somebody, but being unable to go through with it. He is not a killer.
No, he nicks the guy above the
Yep.
elbow with a sword and runs his horse down with his horse, but ultimately can't cut him down. And the guy
Guy
surrenders. The
surrenders.
Frenchman
And
surrenders.
he's told he's going to get a medal, which in the face of things seems meaningless to him because he didn't even murder the man, and the guy basically surrendered to him. So we have a little more disillusionment, a little more adulting and growing up from Nikolai. And then we get Natasha, who attempts suicide. She drinks some poison.
Yes, and is sick and is taking pills, and the ritual of taking care of her and giving her the pills kind of calms everyone
Yeah, it's
down,
almost a little
as
like
well
little
as regular
Munchausen,
visits by
little
Pierre.
Munchausen going on there, maybe.
A little bit.
But in the process, Natasha finds God, and she is much like many of our characters when they're at their lowest. They seek refuge in the church. Is it Russian Orthodox? Is that what they would be doing?
Yes, I can't imagine it would be anything
Yeah. Okay.
else. Oh, yes, of course. The language that's being used, as Tolstoy references, is
Yeah.
Slavonic. It's Old Russian. It's part of the Russian Orthodox
Right.
liturgy. And it also means that a lot of the people listening don't really understand what is being said or don't fully understand what's being
Right. Like
said
Latin
because
and
Slavonic
yeah.
to Russian is much like Middle English would be to
Yeah. Or
us
or Latin.
or
Yeah.
Old English.
Um, What else? Pierre starts spending a lot of time with Natasha. She finds great comfort in him, probably because she sees him as, well, a once pious man. I don't know if she really knows the extent of his debaucheries now with gambling and drinking, but he was once a very pious man. And of course, Pierre is slowly falling in love with her all over again. He's always sort of been in love with her. But we have a very interesting scene where Pierre gets very into numerology, specifically the numerology of the number of the beast 666, and he
Yes,
find which strangely enough came on page 665 and then carried on to page 666, which
of our version, of our
seemed like
translation, of
a
our edition.
impossible that wasn't somehow gamed in order to happen. It was, I mean, literally happening on those pages 665 and 666 where they're talking
I
about.
enjoyed that very much.
Uh, but yeah, Pierre has the strange thing where there's this thing happening in sort of the, I don't know, the mysticism circles where they're taking these French letters and assigning numbers to them, and then if you write, the Emperor Napoleon, you add it all up, it gets 666, and then Pierre starts doing this very comical thing where he tries to make his own name in French equals 666, and he has to remove letters and add a different letter, and finally he finds a way to do it. And then,
Sure, use an apostrophe,
yeah,
make a contraction. It's very
yeah,
charming. I don't think Tolstoy buys into
no,
that. I
I think
think Tolstoy's having a lot
he's
of
having
fun.
fun. He's making fun of it. But Pierre does not think it is silly, and in fact, by the fact that he's able to link himself to Napoleon, it purports to him that he has some major historical significance awaiting him. And now he believes himself to be an important figure cosmically, much akin to Napoleon. He doesn't know what that purpose is, but he doesn't believe it's just falling in love with Natasha. So part of his reason of deciding to not be around her anymore is because he thinks he has loftier goals, or the future holds greater things for him, more important things than love.
But the moment he tries to enact those loftier goals in the
Yeah.
meeting of the nobility, trying to decide what to do with Napoleon, he asks a very reasonable
Yep.
question of what are the requirements, what needs to be done, you know, other than just sacrificing everything. Tell us what you need from us. And of course, he's castigated and
A riot
chastised
almost
for
breaks
it.
out.
Yes, very disturbing
Yeah.
scene for me, especially since it follows up on the scene of Petya,
Mm-hmm.
Rostov,
A
uh,
child
uh,
almost, 15.
Natasha's younger
Yeah.
brother, uh, fighting through a crowd in the Red Square to get a glimpse of the
Yep.
emperor and to volunteer as a 15-year-old to be a hussar and ride a horse into battle. And it feels like almost like a crowd scene in a Beatles
Yeah. No,
movie,
they all want to see
except
Alexander. Yeah.
yeah, not for fun. It's hero worship. It's a totemic worship of a
Yeah.
tyrant. I was reminded of scenes of people being crushed to death when
Yeah.
Stalin's death was announced.
And what was
And
Alexander throwing out to the crowd?
I think
Yeah, cookies.
biscuits. Now, the
Cookies.
biscuits, I don't know what these biscuits are. Because whatever Pavir and his wife translate as biscuits into English, I can't find the Russian
I'm
equivalent.
sure they
I
mean
mean, maybe
cookies. I'm
they're,
sure it's the English version of cookies.
yeah, but Russians don't even have cookies per se.
Hmm.
I mean, my grandma did make chocolate chip cookies. The idea
Yeah.
that you bake a cookie doesn't feel very
Doesn't feel Russian.
Russian.
Okay.
So I'd like to know what these biscuits are exactly. I think there's something a little more
Hmm.
interesting than
Okay.
that. And the footnote tells us that that's the one historical
Yeah,
detail
that Tolstoy
that
couldn't prove.
Tolstoy, when challenged, could not
I know.
find, could not source.
Funny footnote.
But it's a great
Yeah,
scene.
he definitely wanted the emperor to seem very cruel and completely oblivious to the chaos and death he was causing. So yeah, Petya begs to join the army. He almost dies, getting trampled, and then finally his father relents and let him join the army. And in the council scene, the emperor finally appears, and we find out why he gathered all these wealthy merchants and nobles together, and it was because he's giving them orders for each one of them to raise 10,000 men, a levy of 10,000 men. So back in those days, we didn't have conscripted armies like we have today. Armies were paid for by wealthy landowners. And so, for example, if you were the wealthiest person in your area, it was your job to furnish an army, to give them weapons and armor, and feed them and prepare them as part of your duty to your country. And so all of these wealthy,
From the slaves that you
right?
own, or the
Yes,
serfs,
usually,
same
not always,
difference.
but that was the vast majority, I'm sure. Yeah,
And what that meant is that you gave up the labor that they would be doing for
yeah,
you to enrich you. Now goes towards cannon
yeah,
fodder, which is the words that Tolstoy actually uses in
yeah.
French.
So they're all told to get their 10,000 men, and Pierre, who loves to get caught up in the moment, and he loves when he's into something, he likes to go all in. And he says that he wants to give everything he has, his every penny and every drop of blood in order, to serve the sovereign and the nation. And he becomes very, very patriotic and a zealot for his country in that moment. And this is his historical purpose. He has the number of the beast, much like Napoleon, and he will defeat Napoleon with his levied army. What else?
And then we cut to the Rostovs.
Yeah, we get the Rostovs.
And if those scenes are disturbing, the Rostovs are even worse.
Yeah,
Um, the old prince
he's dying.
keeps moving from bed to
Yeah,
bed because every time he tries to sleep in the same place, it brings up bad
yeah.
memories. that keep him from sleep. At the same time, he's not fully in the present. He starts to forget stuff.
Yeah.
He misremembers and misinterprets letters, and they are in grave physical
Yeah.
danger from Bonaparte's advancing
And we
troops.
get I
Uh,
think, the first instance ever of fake news in literature, where he has brought a letter from his son telling him just how dire things are, and his father basically calls it fake news and says, no, they are, he almost doesn't even take in the facts of the letter. He thinks Napoleon's army is still in Poland. The letter is trying to tell him they're somewhere else, and he keeps, the information won't even soak into his brain that that's what's happening.
they're 40 miles
Yeah.
away,
And
literally 40 miles
and
away.
whether there's senility taking place here, or some sort of early onset Alzheimer's, or just that he mentally cannot handle this, we don't know yet. But or whether he's ill.
There's a
I mean,
beautiful passage where he remembers being a young
yeah,
general
I
at the
know,
front
amazing.
and meeting the Queen, and then it cuts to him kissing the Queen Catherine's
Yeah,
hand when she's lying in her
yeah,
sarcophagus, and it's a beautiful uh, memory that comes alive for him as an escape in that moment. It touched me dearly, and at the same time, kind of makes me believe that he's very close to being
yeah,
completely lost to any sense of reality.
totally.
And it's unbearably beautiful at the same time.
Yep.
And then we get a scene of civilian bombardment of French cannonballs landing in a town and destroying buildings and smashing walls, and then the civilians who live in that town starting to burn it down so the French don't get the goods, and don't get to keep it as a reward.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily disturbing, and someone shows up in the middle of all that by pure accident. Andre
Right.
is
Yes.
there and talks to a servant of his father, and sets him right. Like go and tell the old man he must leave immediately.
Yeah.
And it's a very intense sequence. It's a very disturbing sequence.
Well, citizens they're burning their own farms and homes rather than let them fall into the hands of the French.
Yes, and doing it out of spite, doing
yeah.
it not as some kind of strategy, even though Tolstoy tells us in the very beginning of that section that even though nobody planned it, even though nobody figured it out, it just so happened that that was something that defeated and ultimately destroyed Napoleon's army. Because later on they had no provisions.
Yeah, well, and Tolstoy has a really funny section where he talks about how it should have been so obvious to Napoleon that to attempt to invade Russia in winter would lead to his destruction, but it equally should have been as obvious to the Russians that to try to stop him from entering Russia during winter would lead to their destruction as well. And that both of them, it should have been obvious that the Russians should have just let Napoleon march on in, because he was not getting back out in the middle of winter.
And they kind of did, but
not on purpose.
As a plan,
yeah,
but because there was infighting among the generals who didn't want to serve under each other and who despised each other.
But it's an interesting perspective, because it's not typical historical fiction where we are in the present. Tolstoy is always writing where from the future, where he knows the outcome. He's not right. We're not in the moment of, oh, who's going to win, who's not. He's always, we're always looking at it from the end result, and judging it from that perspective. And it's an interesting thing that you don't see very often in historical fiction, for the whole plot to be spoiled constantly at all. It's just, because it would have been like writing about World War II. In 1960, it's like it's all fresh in everybody's minds. They know everything that happened. You can't pretend.
Sure, or writing about the Civil War in the 1930s, with Gone with the
Yeah,
Wind.
exactly. Yeah.
It's very the burning scenes, the scenes of the
Hmm.
bombardment of Smolensk, reminded me of the burning of
Oh,
Atlanta
of course. Yeah.
in
How could you
Gone
not see that? For
with
sure.
the Wind. Except that there's absolutely no sentimentality.
No, 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 no. This is not. This is
Uh,
not a
it-
beautiful land that this is not the bell tolling on a great culture. Yeah.
no, it's almost like Tolstoy is as pitiless towards the Russians
Mm-hmm.
as he is towards Napoleon and the
Yeah.
French. He's not bemoaning the loss of
Yeah.
anything. He's not bemoaning, like, for me, a key passage is when everybody has been speaking French as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible and writing in French, in the first half of the novel. And now suddenly everybody is speaking
Right.
Russian because the French are
Yeah. It's
waging war.
blasphemous.
And it's on page,
It'd be
but
blasphemous to speak French now.
yes, it
Right.
would be
Yeah.
unpatriotic. And of course, they're bad at speaking
Yeah.
Russian. So they switching to French in the middle of these Russian
Yeah.
speeches. And it's very funny, but it also it's Tolstoy constantly reminding you that there's no such thing as pure Russia. There's no such thing as a pure nationalist,
Right.
pure religious, uniquely Russian spirit. You're already indebted to the enemy for your culture.
Sure.
You're already indebted to the enemy for your thinking.
Yeah.
And of course, the Germans are there too. And the fact that
Oh, and they hate the Germans.
they hate the Germans, but at the same time, the Germans are the closest advisors to the sovereign. And also, half of their generals and half of their military theoreticians are German. There's no such thing as the South.
Right.
There's no such thing as a homeland here. And even in church, there's no comfort for Natasha when, on the one hand, the sermon tells her you must love your enemies, and on the other hand, let's defeat our enemies, the French, and then let's ask God for the force and the might to do that. Like David defeated Goliath. And even Natasha, even 17-year-old Natasha, who's naive and young, is asking, well, okay, on the one hand, you're asking for David to defeat Goliath. On the other hand, you're telling us to love Goliath, which isn't.
Yep.
And it's quite a sophisticated criticism for her to reach at that point.
All right. Well, we're going a little long here, so let's call it for today. But we will tomorrow hit a wonderful milestone of 750 pages. The book is obviously ramping up. War is ramping up. All thoughts are turning away from love and towards life or death situations. And we will see what comes tomorrow, Dimitri. In the book and out of the book.
More violence, more destruction, in and out of the book. Sure. Again, Matt, right now I'm questioning that I should be reading this.
It's going to have a very happy ending. Don't worry. We're going to be fine.
Yeah. It's no longer giving me the comfort.
No, it's not a comforting
that I
book.
so desperately need. And I blame you.
You should. Good night, Dimitri, and we will talk tomorrow. Keep reading all. Bye-bye.